Evening. Right. So, Parsha Mekeitz. Just before we begin the parsha, we've had now last Thursday night was the first night of Hanukkah, tonight is the last night of Hanukkah. So, just a very brief idea on the last night of Hanukkah. Zos Hanukkah. It's traditionally known as Zos Hanukkah, primarily because the laning. Tomorrow's morning's laning begins with the word Zos Hanukkah Mizbeach. Not begins with, by the time we get there, Zos Hanukkah Mizbeach. This is the dedication of Mizbeach, the counting up of all of the korbanos and all of the everything, the gifts that were given by the Nesiim. The Sfas Emes, I think, quoting the Chidush Yorim, he says that the whole idea of the Pach Shemen, or one aspect of the Pach Shemen, the jar of oil that's discovered, is the idea that we have within us this, all of us have this, if you like, this Pach Shemen within us. We have this spark of purity, of holiness that's preserved within us. And part of the message of Hanukkah is to nurture that spark, to develop that spark, and to develop it and to grow it until we get to the last day of Hanukkah, the Zos Hanukkah. When we say Zos Hanukkah, which literally translates as this is Hanukkah, it's the essence of Hanukkah. It's the day when, if you like, that spark has prevailed. We've actually achieved that sense of completion. The 8th day is the one above the natural order, the 7 days, and the 8th day is the natural. We've achieved the essence of Hanukkah, Zos Hanukkah, to achieve that completion and the development and the nurturing of that spark. And he brings a beautiful, beautiful posuk, which we say at the end of davening, at the end in Avodat Zion. It's a posuk in Divrei Hayomim Aleph, Choftes, Per Choftes posuk, I think Ches or Yud Ches, Shomra Zos L'Olam Liyetze Machshavos Levav, which literally translates as preserve this forever, Shomra Zos L'Olam Liyetze Machshavos Levav, so that it may be the formation of the thoughts of your people's heart. And he suggests that the request, if you like, that we make of Hashem at the end of davening every day, at the end of Avodat Zion, is Shomra Zos La'olam, preserve the Zos, the energy and the aspect of Zos Hanukkah, the Pach Shemen, this jar of oil, that spark of purity, of holiness, of Kedusha. You want to call it the Pintel Yid, you want to call it the Nakuda Pnimis that's inside each of us, that inner spark, may that always be preserved, preserve it forever, so that it's the formation of the thoughts of our hearts, that it directs us towards thinking and acting in the correct way every day, which I think is a very beautiful idea and a way of taking forward, hopefully, the message of Hanukkah beyond and going forward. To turn to the parsha itself. So I came across an incredible idea by Moshe Shapiro, which I think puts really, when you hear it, it strikes me. Why didn't I notice this? It's one of these things that hits you, and you think, why didn't I notice this before? In Parshas Vayeshev, so you have Perek Lamates, and you'll see why this is directly relevant to this week's parsha as well. Perek Lamates, Posuk Chof Gimel. It says just before Shvi, Ein sar beisasoy haroya es kol umo biyodoi. He didn't see anything. He trusted Yosef completely. The prison, the guy who was running the prison. Basher Hashem itoy. That Hashem was with him. V'hashehu hoseh Hashem atzlich. And everything he did, Hashem caused him to be successful. Okay. Now the amazing thing is that in this pasuk, the Shem Hashem, the Shem Havaya, Yud Kei Vav Kei, is used twice in that pasuk, right? Basher Hashem itoy, Hashem was with him, and everything he did, Hashem made him successful, right? The name Yud Kei Vav Kei does not appear then throughout the entire Parsha Mekeitz and the whole of Vayigash. You ever noticed that before? Amazing. I never noticed that. Lenin was there for Shabbos for 9-10 years. The name Yud Kei Vav Kei, from that posuk, it does not appear the whole way through Parshas Mekeitz and Vayigash. And in a moment, I'll share with you when it does appear for the first time subsequently to that. And he says, the Meforshim, they all wonder. There's one parsha in the Torah, right, where Moshe Rabbeinu's name doesn't appear, right? Parshas Tetzaveh, and everyone has all these Torahs as to why it is, because he asked Mecheni no Misifracha, erase me from your sefer. So everyone has all these. Why is there's one parsha Moshe Rabbeinu's name doesn't appear, and everyone goes crazy. And here you have an entire 2 parsha in the Torah where the actual name of Hashem does not appear. The name Elokim does, but the actual name, the Shem Yud Kei Vav Kei, does not appear. Why is it? It's astonishing. So he says what is clearly going on here is that the descent of Yosef into prison is the beginning of exile. It's the beginning of God. It's the real beginning, if you like. I mean, we know that there are different ways of understanding those years of exile, how you count them and everything else. But that symbolically, if you think about it, when Yosef goes into prison, it symbolizes the beginning of the exile, of the Egyptian exile. And therefore, the particular light, the illumination of the Shem Havah, the Shem Hashem, is concealed. It's hidden. It's hidden. In Shmos, where Moshe Rabbeinu is introduced to where Hashem, he turns to Hashem. He has the dialogue with Hashem at the snare, the burning bush, and he says to them, they'll ask me, what's his name and what should I say? Yeah, and he says to them, then he reveals the name. He reveals his name. And he says, Zeh Shmi La'olam, this is my name forever. And as we understand, Chazal say that the word La'olam also means to be concealed, to be hidden. In a time of exile, that name is concealed, that name is hidden. And that's and if you like, with this idea, understanding that the redemption in from the exile in Egypt, from the Golus Mitzrayim, coming about through that name, and that whole dialogue between Moshe Rabbeinu and Hashem, it brings it alive when you realize that this whole end section almost of Bereshis, the name is hardly there, right? The whole of Mekeitz Megash, the central part of the story where the brothers come down, everything else, it doesn't appear, which really brings extra meaning, I think, to that. And then what happens is that the next time that the name, the Shem Hashem, does appear after that is in Parshas Vayechi, and it is in the last word at the end of Revi and Vayechi, the bracha that's given to Don, right? It says Lishuoscha kivisi Hashem. I hope for your salvation, Hashem. That instance, the word Kevovke, is the next time. So it doesn't appear a single time from this pasuk in Vayeshev all the way through to the bracha given to Don in Parshas Vayechi, where it says Lishuoscha kivisi Hashem. Says Rav Moshe Shapiro that is the power of that tefillah, that bracha, to be able to hope for the salvation of Hashem even within Golus, even within exile. That's really the essence of the message of that bracha. I yearn for your deliverance. I mentioned this last, not this particular point, but I mentioned the symbolism and the idea behind that posuk in the Lady Shiur last night on the month of Tevis, which is available on the Toras Chaim YouTube channel, both for men and women. Anyone wants to listen to that shiur, and how that works, how that fits with the month of Tevis, and particularly with Shevet Don. But either way, what you see from here for our purposes is that what we're dealing with here in Mekeitz is the depths of the beginning of the exile of the Golus, and therefore we have that concealment of the name of Hashem. But there is another idea that is brought out, if you like, in the fact that that when that name is revealed once more, is used once more, where in reference to being able to hope for Hashem's salvation, even in a moment of darkness, even in a moment of deep exile, of deep galus, is the idea of hoping for Hashem's salvation at any moment. The idea that it can change in an instant. From the depths of despair, salvation can arise at any moment. And the Sforno brings this out very beautifully. Perek Mem Aleph Posuk Yud Dalet. When Yosef is brought out of the pit of the bar, what does it say? It says, "Vayishlach Paro vayikros Yosef." Paro sends and he called Yosef. They hurry him out from the pit. Vayigalach and he shaves. Vayichalef simlo sov. He changes his garments. Vayovoy el Paro, and he came to Paro. Says the Sforno, "Kederech kol teshuas Hashem shenases kumoy rega." This is the manner of every time that Hashem brings about salvation, it happens in an instant. Ka'omrei ki krova Yeshua silavay. Brings a pasuk in Yeshaya, my salvation is very close. Or ka'omrei lo mishmeli, means another pasuk. And then he says, you find exactly the same thing. V'chein hoya inyan Mitzrayim. When they left Mitzrayim, it's the same idea. Ki gorshu Mitzrayim. And as we famously say from the Haggadah, they didn't have time to rise. You know, everyone asks that question. You know, what's the difference? They've been there for 210 years, right? You can wait another couple of days and the dough can rise. No, because the idea the way the Torah demonstrates to us how, if you like, Hashem operates geula, redemption, salvation, is specifically in the manner of Keherav Ayin, the blink of an eye, right? The blink of an eye. Yosef is in the depths of the dungeon. Vayritzuhum in habar. They rush him out of the bar. It's a bit like the Megillah, with Esther. Everything changes. It can change very, very quickly, and that's what you have at the Geula from Mitzrayim as well. Yetzias Mitzrayim, and says the Swan. It carries on. The Kach Omala Asos leOsid, and so will it be in the future. Ka'omre, as it says. Ufisom yovoy al heicholoi ha'odon asher atem avakshim. Yeah, he will suddenly come into his sanctuary. It will happen in the blink of an eye. You say, Yeshuas Hashem Keherav Ayin. The salvation of Hashem is like the blink of an eye. The challenge is to keep that hope alive in Golus itself, the idea and the belief that everything can change in an instant. And when Yaakov says that bracha, Mishuosko Kivisi Hashem, the way Ramosha understands it is it's not Ramosha Shapiro, it's not so much although it sounds like a prophecy in Nevuah, and we know that whole piece there in reference to the tribe of Don, Shevet Don, is referring to Shimshon, right? Shimshon is the one who says, who cries out to Hashem to save him, right, from the Plishtim, and he ends up bringing down the destruction on all of them when he dies in between the pillars. He famously breaks the pillars, right? Again, I discussed this at great length last night. Yaakov says, L'shuascha kivisi Hashem, as a bracha, as a blessing, that we will always have the power to keep hope alive and the power of strength to realize that salvation can come in an instant. And this also links to the idea of change in an instant, and that Hashem is able and operates in that way, is also found in the very name of this parsha. The parsha begins Vayhi Mekeitz Shnosayim Yomim, right? Now that word Mekeitz is very specific. There are two words for the end. Literally it means obviously it was at the end of 2 years, right? 2 years actually he had to stay in prison, famously because he asked the butler to take him to Paro, and he didn't. He had to stay another 2 years, right? And it was at the end of 2 years. But there are two words that we have for end. Yeah, we have the word sof and we have the word kates. And there's a big difference between them. The word sof is a finality, right? It's the final, it's the end. That's what it is. It's end, finished. Kates means something else. Kates effectively means it's the end of an era. It's an epoch. We talk about the example the Beis Halevi gives. He says, it could be, this is explained actually more so by Rav Soloveitchik, is that the idea of a kates means that a period has ended, an epoch has ended, and therefore it's time now. The time has now arrived for Yosef to be released. It's not so much end, finished. By he Mekeitz, the kates has arrived. We talk about kates in reference to Moshiach, right? The kates hagula, the end. The kates has arrived. The end has arrived. There's also, I can't remember, the pasuk is escaping me, but with Noach as well. There's also a pasuk with Noach where it talks about Kate. That's right, Kate's kol basar b'lefonai. I think that's what it is, right? Where it says that Hashem says the end of all flesh has come before me. And as the time has now arrived to finish this, and if you like, something totally new is beginning, and that arrives only when and exactly when Hashem determines it to be so. Vayhi Mekeitz Shnosayim Yomim. Exactly 2 years, bang, Yosef is out of prison, right? Because that is the way it works. It works it's under the hashgacha pratis, Hashem's direct involvement in running the show is at the precise moment and time when Hashem deems it to be the right moment to do so. And that is what we have in the if you like, the beginning of the parsha that sets the tone, not just for Parsha Mekeitz, but also for Vayigash all the way through. This is the beginning of the story of the exile itself. So we'll move on now to Perek Mem Beis Posuk Zion and the associated Pesukim to try and if you like, develop and present some ideas, some pathways towards understanding what goes on, what transpires between Yosef and his brothers. This is when you approach Parshas Mekeitz, Actually, in many years, we are so focused on Hanukkah around Parsha Mekeitz that we don't think about Mekeitz very much at all, which is a great shame. And this year, of course, is a great opportunity, to be totally focused on Mekeitz. Highly unusual, of course, that Mekeitz is Mekeitz alone, without Hanukkah this year on Shabbos itself. But obviously, what everyone looks at Parsha Mekeitz, the one thing that everyone is of course struggles to understand is what exactly is going on. Why does Yosef do this? Why is it that he takes his brothers and his father, by extension his father, this extended period of anguish and all the trials and tribulations and Shimon and Binyamin and not telling his father, and you feel the pain of his father, those psukim, where the whole dialogue with the brothers, you feel the pain, you feel the emotion there, where Yaakov has to be pushed so far, and Reuven first offers to be the one to guarantee. He says, what's the point? He said, Reuven says, Shnei Bonai Thomas, my two sons will die. And Yaakov says, well, what on earth? Rashi says that, Ben Shota, who's there, he's a fool. What I want my grandchildren to die, and only when Yehuda says, I will be the guarantor. Again, we spoke last week about Yehuda and leadership, and only then a painful episode. So there are two broad approaches towards understanding this, right? There's the approach of the Ramban, and there's the approach of the Akedah Yitzchak, Rabbi Yitzchak HaRama. Now, obviously, there's not the only two, but I think they are the two, if you like, two of the broad streams in terms of approaching what is going on. The Ramban, Perek Mem Beis Posuk Tes, says like this. On the Posuk where it says, Yosef remembers the dreams that he had dreamed about them, and he says to them, you are spies. You have come to see the, literally it means the nakedness of the land. He accuses them of being spies. Says the Ramban, what does it mean that Yosef remembers the dreams that he has dreamed about them? He says, he brings Rashi first of all. Rashi says he's seen that the dreams have been fulfilled, that they bow down to him. Says the Ramban, no, it's the other way around. On the contrary, he sees the brothers bowing down, and he realizes that not all the dreams, they haven't yet all, at least not fully, they haven't been fully fulfilled. Because he knew from the first dream that all of his brothers would bow down, right? All of his brothers would bow down to him. And the second time, he sees the sun and the moon and the stars, right? And he sees bowing down. He sees, and Binyamin hasn't come. Since he has seen Binyamin hasn't come with them, he wanted to put in motion a process in order so that they would bring Binyamin, his brother, as well, down to Mitzrayim to fulfill the dream. So according to the Ramban, the driver here, the primary reason, and the Ramban goes on, and I think he explains other aspects of why Yosef acts in this particular way, how to understand the other aspects of the story, right? But either way, the key driver is the fulfillment of the dreams, right? That's the primary motivation. The primary motivation is Yosef sees the dreams as almost a prophecy, a nevuah. They have to, in that sense, and they have to be fulfilled. And therefore, he needs Binyamin to come down to Mitzrayim. Now, obviously, there are questions, there are difficulties with this. The Akedah Yitzchak asks on the Ramban, why would you, or is it our responsibility, or would it be Yosef's responsibility to make sure that the dream is fulfilled in this way? That's the obvious question. Does he need to, is it his duty to make sure that it's fulfilled in this way? That's one of the questions. So before we come on to the Akedah Yitzchak's pshat, just to understand a little bit deeper the Ramban's pshat, Rav Dessler says, and he has a broader piece on the parsha where he basically it sets out how many of the things that transpire in the life of Yosef at this period are almost like an introduction to the life that his descendants will live, the Jewish people will undergo, Klal Yisrael will undergo whilst they are themselves enslaved in Egypt and Mitzrayim. And he sets things in motion, both on a physical level and also on a spiritual level, to lighten the burden in some way that they will have to bear in terms of the actual exile and the servitude, the subjugation they will undergo in Mitzrayim. In some way, he's able to mitigate that. I mean, there are one of the classic examples that's given, I think Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky talks about this, I'm not sure if Dessler does, is the whole system that he puts in place at the end of the Parsha Parshas Vayigash, sorry, with the Kohanim. Maybe we'll have a chance to talk about this in more detail another time. But with the whole the chok laKohanim, he gives a statute of food to the Kohanim, right? The priests of Egypt are given a certain amount of grain or whatever it is at the end of Vayigash, and that whole piece there, it is argued, was in order to enable the exclusion from servitude for the priestly tribe, which would benefit descendants as well. So Rav Dessler says that, and it's difficult to understand this, I suppose, in a hashkafic sense. But there's this idea of that the most righteous, the tzaddikim, have to bear sometimes the trials and tribulations of the whole generation. So by causing the brothers to undergo these trials and tribulations, somehow in a spiritual sense, it lessens the burdens of their descendants. However we are to understand that. In other words, it's broader than just Yosef saying, I need the dream to be fulfilled because that's what I've dreamed, but that the actual bowing down, the difficulties they have to undergo, somehow releases in some way, lessens the burden that their descendants have to undergo. And if you like, another little piece that we can perhaps add to that is there is a sign, if you like, of the way because this whole approach is basically based on the idea that it's the direct hashgacha, Hashem guiding and directing it. It's all direct hashgacha, but it's that this has to transpire in a spiritual sense before the full exile begins. These events have to take place. A key sign of the Yad Hashem, the hand of Hashem here, is at the end of the parsha. Rav Soloveitchik highlights the mysterious ish. There's a common denominator in Vayeshev, Vayishlach, Vayeshev, and Mekeitz. You notice that another theme, right? There's an ish that applies in each of these three parshas, right? There's the ish who wrestles with Yaakov in Vayishlach. There's the ish who says to, when he goes looking for the brothers, yeah, that's right. There's Nosum is there. They've traveled away. Who's this ish? And then here you have this. Yeah, you have this. Perek Mem Gimel Posach of Gimel has a whole dialogue here with an ish. We don't know who it is. I mean, I think Rashi says it was Menashe, but it's not clear. It doesn't say, the Torah doesn't say who it is. They have this whole thing, and he says they're very scared. They say to him, "We're very scared. We don't know what's going to be." And he says to them, "Shalom lochem al tiro." You don't be afraid. Now, every time you see the word Elokechem or Elokim, you'll think of that idea. You notice now the whole way through. Not in the name of Hashem. It's always Elokim and the whole way through, right? And he brought out for them Shimon, etc. So says Rav Soloveitchik, the first ish, the ish in Vayishlach, Yaakov knows who his enemy is because he knows it's the Sar Shel Esav, it's the representation of the Malach of Esav. But the other two, he doesn't know who the ish is. There's a deliberate concealment of this mysterious man to show that Hashem is the one directing events. So it's almost like we don't even need to know who the identity of this person is because Hashem is in control. Hashem orchestrates that a man is there and they have a dialogue with him. Hashem orchestrates that a man is there, whether you understand it's a malach, it's not the point. The point is that we don't need to know the name because Hashem is in control. So there's that theme runs through this parsha. All the twists and turns in the way the brothers interact, the way Yosef interacts with them, is all part of the divine plan. That's the idea of that ish, of the mysterious ish. So that's the Rambam. What does the Akedah Yitzchak say? Yitzchak HaRambam, I'm sure there are others also who develop the same idea. He says that what Yosef was concerned about was that a sudden reappearance of himself within the family unit could really break up the family permanently forever. Because if they still held that same animosity towards him, and he suddenly walks in as a king almost, from Mitzrayim, I don't know if he mentions that aspect of it, but presumably that goes without saying. The damage could be immense. It could really completely drive the family apart if they still harbor that animosity towards him. So what he has to do is he has to identify whether they have really done teshuvah. He has to identify and do something that shows and demonstrates whether they have really understood the error of their ways. And the way he does that is the whole test with Binyamin, right? That's how he orchestrates a situation where they have to put their lives on the line for his younger brother. And if they are able to do that, then he can tell that the family can be reunited again. Now, there are questions on this explanation as well, not least that the Torah says, "Vayizkar es hachalomas," right? He remembers the dreams. That's the Ramban's, that's why the Ramban goes down that route. Although you could say, he remembers the dreams in the sense that the dreams are the precipitation of the animosity of the brothers and the selling him into slavery. And you can understand it in that way. But there are a number of pointers which support Rabbi Yitzchak Arama's pshat, the Akedas Yitzchak pshat. If you look at the psukim carefully, from Perek Mem Beis Posuk Chof Beis, let's just find this 1 second. Which ones? Perek Mem Beis. No, not before Chof Beis. Sorry, Tesvav. Vayom Elem Yosef. Okay, so he says to them, he accused them of being meraglim. Yeah, and they say to him, no, we're all brothers. It's not true. We left the young one behind. And Yosef says, no, that's what I meant. You'll see, you're meraglim. Bezos tibo, your spies. Bezos tibo chenu. What does he say? He says, you're not going to leave here. Right? Unless you bring your younger brother here, you're not leaving. He says, send one back, and they should go and bring your brother, and you stay here, and we'll then see if it's true. And if not, then what does he do? He brings him into prison for 3 days. Then Yosef says on the third day, do this, and then you should live. I fear God. If it's true, he says, I'm going to leave one of your brothers should stay here, in the prison, and you can go and bring the food home, and you bring your younger brother to me, and then we'll see if you're telling the truth and you won't die. And they did so. And then then they start regretting and they say, we sinned, we're guilty about our brother, we saw his pain, he appealed to us, we didn't listen, etc., etc. There's two basic questions here. Number one, why did he change the plan? He completely reverses the plan, right? Originally, the idea was, you all stay here, right? These are things you just don't notice unless you'll stay here, send someone else back home to bring you up. And then he changes it completely after 3 days. He says, you know what? Actually, I'll keep one here and you will go back. Plus, the other problem is, it says, Vayasu Chaim, and they did so. They did so, right? So it says, they did so. And then it says, but we're guilty, etc., etc. And Reuven says, it's because we did this to him, right? I told you not to do this. What is it? Why is the words Vayasu Chaim inserted before the dialogue amongst the brothers themselves about what they had done wrong? The Vayasu Chaim means they did what he told them to do, but that should be afterwards. Afterwards, they all go back to the land of Canaan, right? So what is going on here? Rav Shimon Schwab in Mayan Beis HaShoeva says that Yosef has a change of heart. He undergoes a thought process himself, and he says to himself, well, if you think about it, at the beginning he suggests that Yosef originally thought, I'm going to just make sure that one of them is going to go back. But he says to himself then afterwards, hold on a second, that's not really just. Why should it be that they should all be left with famine in their homes, right? Because I'm keeping them all imprisoned here, right? Okay, except for someone to go back, one person to go back and get their brothers. All the rest of them are going to stay their houses back in Canaan are going to be left starving if I keep all of them here apart from one. Yeah. So he says that's not just, and therefore he changes it to the opposite way, and he says, I'm going to keep one here as security, and the rest of them can go back. Better to feed their families. Now, what that means here is that he is demonstrating, I fear Hashem, that someone who fears Hashem thinks about what they've done, thinks about their actions and the consequences of their actions and where their actions have led or will lead. So 3 days later, he has thought to himself, actually, this is not just. How can I leave their families starving? And that, he says Rosh Hashanah, is what the brothers see. And they see suddenly how a ruler, the last person who will ever say, I made a mistake. It's the hardest thing for a leader to do. I made a mistake. I messed up. Yeah, I made a mistake. Actually, what I decreed was not just. and I should do something else, right? Hardest thing to do, to say sorry, to apologize, say I made a mistake. And he says, if he could admit to doing something unjust, maybe we were insensitive too. And maybe during the last year, all these years that we've been thinking we were right about selling Yosef, maybe really we were incorrect. Maybe we made a mistake. And maybe we should have thought carefully about whether or not we had done the right thing. And therefore they say, Avol Ashemim Anachnu. We were guilty. We were guilty about what we've done. And that is why it's Vayasu Chaim. Vayasu Chaim is not Vayasu Chaim. They did so in the sense that they agreed and they sent one brother, they kept one brother back and they all went home. No, Vayasu Chaim, they did so, they investigated their own actions to deliberate and think, were we right? Was it correct what we did to Yosef? And they come to the conclusion, they learned from Yosef himself that actually what they'd done was incorrect. It was the wrong way. It was the wrong way to behave. That was not something they should have done. This is the sign of the beginning of that process of tshuva. That is what is revealed through Yosef's own actions. That's what transpires here. It leads the brothers to understand that they themselves have, if you like, need to demonstrate should have demonstrated a greater sensitivity. What they learn, and they begin to learn from Yosef, is his thoughtfulness and sensitivity shows them that was what they were lacking, that situations are complex, and their conclusion that it was right to do this to Yosef may in fact have been faulty, and that begins them down the correct pathway eventually. And Yosef's test is kept in the sense, as we know, that they succeed with Binyamin. They demonstrate that they had corrected that feeling of animosity towards him. So there you have the two pathways of the Ramban and their Kedas Yitzchak. Much more to talk about, but I think that will be enough for now. I wish you all a good Shabbos, and whatever you wish, a good Zos Chanukah, or enjoy the last day of Chanukah. Okay.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank
you.
you
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Rabbi?
Yes.
Sorry, the three issues. So Yaakov's ish, he knew who he was. Yosef's ish, and Yosef's man, he did or didn't know?
Yosef, I don't think he did. I mean, Rashi says there, if not, there was Malach Gavriel, right?
Right, but did Yosef know it was Malach Gavriel?
Yosef doesn't know, doesn't see clearly that exactly. We don't know that it seems that, Salvation certainly understands that it seems that Yosef did not know. So you have the second two, and similarly with the brothers as well. Again, if you learn it was Menashe, then maybe they did know, but then again, even then, they wouldn't have known who he was, probably.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Okay, pleasure.
Trying to think how the Rav said